Hello friends, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to like and subscribe as it greatly helps out the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Enjoy! At long last, we're here. We're gonna talk about some good old religion. Y'all know I've been waiting for it because super fascinating, which is funny. So most of y'all watching know this. I went to where I got my degree was they studied religion and I went in there not really caring about studying religion, but they turned me around. So now it's like super interesting.
That happened to me too.
Funny, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I wonder if we know some of the same people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are you good? Do you need to take a break?
No, I'm good.
You're good. Awesome.
Yeah.
So, this article here, this one is called "The Blood of Christ Compels Them: State Religiosity and State Population Mobility During the Coronavirus Pandemic." Again, are you the one coming up with the titles? Because I'm loving them.
Yes,
I love it, man. That's for y'all who don't really know much about academics. This is basically like clickbait. It's like, ooh,
you may not like the article, but you'll like the title.
Yeah, you love the title. Yeah. All right, so we've already talked a little bit about religion, and especially their very contentious relationship, and this spans back since the basically religion. It came right between science, religion, especially between Protestantism and evangelical Christians. So, what are some of the major factors, especially during the pandemic, that have led to this contentious relationship?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to note that there is a tension, perceived tension between conservative Christianity and science. There does seem to be this tension, but it wasn't always always the case. I mean, if you can just look historically, some of the greatest minds know were often very religious, coming from very religious households, or even sometimes like religious leadership, like ministers and things. There wasn't always this. I think, I'm not a historian of religion, but I will say this: um, have this broader context of secularization, where there are some indicators to suggest that maybe society is becoming less religious. Have this response of the Christian nationalists saying to renew our Christian traditions, so forth. And then you have this again competing for the hearts and minds of the people, science versus religion. And when science started, Scopes trial started, trying to apply science to what was going on in the Bible as a standard or something like that. Started, started to cause some ideological rifts. When maybe previously they treated separately.
Right.
And so I think there's a power struggle going on in science. They seem incompatible, and they are fundamentally one about the natural world, supernatural. Really um, shouldn't be connected. But there is that competition, and you have these conservative Christians who view biblical literalists and interested in Bible, some scientist or scientific text, something like that. The blood of Christ that just came from these conservative Christians talking about vaccinated, or they didn't have to worry about the pandemic, were protected by the blood of Christ, and so that was this kind of belief there. Did not help that the government started shutting down of churches during the pandemic,
Right.
because there were some early evidence that were spreading the virus in congregations, in church settings, and so I think they felt attacked. They were like, "Why are you leaving liquor stores open but closing my church?" Things like that. Things that I think they were feeling attacked, and this is, but to be fair, they felt attacked before. When you think about things like the supposed war on Christmas, the secularization of society,
Right.
Mom was a Muslim, all this stuff about feeling attacked, feeling left behind. I think that's a part of this rift. But I will also say this: it's interesting, because the general religion and health literature doesn't really show, a major resistance to healthcare. Actually, a lot of the literature will tend to actually follow doctor checkups more regularly. So it's really interesting that
Because Man, that's a good point because this even ties back into the initial article, right? That authoritarian belief, right,
Yeah.
is higher religion than your doctor, especially if it's your general, like someone you've been going to. Then it's like, well, of course, yeah, that's what the doctor says. Like
Mhm,
you don't question it because you view him as the authority. And
mhm,
I wonder if that possibly went down, right? Is because, well, in comes a pandemic, in comes a very charismatic leader. And what if your congregation,
yeah.
right, what's being talked about, discussed during the sermon, and you mentioned something else I want to briefly
Mhm,
touch on
mhm,
is, again, we talk about separate, right? It's always like separation between church and state.
mhm,
And this is one of those, that instance of feeling like attacked, like, well, you
mhm,
shutting down the church, like,
mhm,
that's the state infringing on it. But then you also saw, or discussed earlier, right, this whole Christian nationalism that's like actually kind of wants religion reinserted back
mhm,
into the state. So this kind of uh, dance,
mhm,
right, that they're always doing is another really, again, kind of, it makes the mind boggle. But
mhm.
I think that's especially how it's tying into COVID behaviors and how
Mhm.
that potentially has upset the balance because right, a more supreme authority, if not God, right, it was like Trump, and Trump, go figure, Trump's, the doctor's orders, perhaps in some cases.
You can even think authority is increasingly institutions about the examples on a time too much failing
Right.
that's considered a sin and so forth. Now it's considered a disease, and it's like you can just see that institutional dynamics playing out, institutions of medicine having you know, and then trying to resist that and trying to claim its own moral authority, reclaim its own moral.
Wow. Yeah. And then
Yeah,
talk about how
yeah,
it's changed.
yeah,
Drinking, which of course has skyrocketed
yeah.
during the
Oh yeah,
pandemic, is right. It used to, even socially, it'd be like, oh, they have a little bit of a problem. To now,
uh-huh.
yeah, it's totally a medical disease. It's
Hmm. It's been
completely,
medicalized.
yeah, it's been
Yep, yep.
medicalized. It completely uh, changed around. So that's, I
But
hadn't really thought
but
about that. That's
that's a direct conflict.
like, so one thing I did note, or I wanted to ask, especially with this article, is, more strains of COVID, right? Kind
Mhm.
of like the flu. There's always going to be a new strain. They tend to not be as deadly as the
Yeah,
initial and Delta, but far more contagious is kind of what seems to be happening. So I wanted to ask, it's, do you feel that religious beliefs that were dismissive of the
mhm,
severity of COVID might see themselves as vindicated? That the supposed COVID is still high, actually high right now. For
yeah,
those that don't know,
yeah.
however, the deaths are nowhere near what they were.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, we're all. I mean, that's not a unique. I mean, across the political spectrum, we're always looking for information to vindicate,
Hmm.
like our political views, and they have been telling us the whole time that this is like a flu or something like that. And you're right, the severity of coronavirus has declined over time, even as it's infectious. And yeah, I'm sure that there are people saying, "I told you so," and more emboldened to not to get extra sort of social distance, or I'm sure that they are,
Yeah, it.
because it just reinforces
Yeah, it just
beliefs.
goes. Yeah, exactly. It just goes
Yeah,
back to, like you're saying, if price is protecting
yeah,
it. It's just like,
uh-huh.
there we go. I wonder how that gets
Mm.
impacted if you know family member
Yeah,
succumbs, right? Like,
yeah.
or they get
So
seriously ill.
yeah,
That's
I have so I mean, again, this goes back to this idea when we're talking about. I am not suggesting political conservatives or Christian conservatives don't have this capacity for empathy. In
Mhm.
fact, we actually observe that people who are more religious actually do have more empathy. And I think some of the way we measure empathy, they're not asking about you. Do you care if members is suffering?
Mhm.
Like they ask in generally, or that suffering. And so I have no doubt that conservative Christians, the fact that they prioritize and value family, that those types of dynamics could actually change the way I feel about some of these things. Actually, I
Yeah.
actually was like pursuing this type of idea that I wanted to look at conservative Christians who know
Yes.
and then look at their health behavior. That's something I want to
Mhm.
do in the future because like it seems like I don't know if that's where you're going, but
Yeah,
it seems
yeah,
like
that's
I believe that something like that, losing someone close to you, could make the coronavirus real to you
right.
and make you want to be more.
Right, and
Yeah,
I agree with that
yeah,
notion, right? In theory, that
yeah,
to me that would make sense, right?
yeah,
Is like you've seen the severity of this
yeah.
firsthand, but how about
Could you see people on these deathbed confessions where they're like, "I wish would have gotten vaccinated," stuff like that. People regret
wow,
when it comes down to death and being in the hospital. I think people do. It makes it real for them,
yeah,
and
which is sad that
yeah,
again, like it
yeah,
has to get to that point because then I want like you're saying, someone who actually knows someone who's passed who succumbed to COVID, right? What's their interaction
yeah,
now within their own congregation,
yeah,
right? Like, is everything, especially if that person who passed away was also a member of that congregation, that'd be an
yeah.
extra double whammy. It's like, how does the individual deal with that death? How does the congregation deal with that death? Like, does everything, is it, say a prayer for this person and then back to
Well,
whatever we're
I think
doing?
there's there's also some trying to say I think there's that
That's,
initial,
mhm,
like not even one. I think there's going to be some initial motivation to not even to admit it's COVID,
yeah,
um, something else. But yeah, I don't. I mean, I think these are all interesting ideas for research projects because they get it. I like this because it gets us the subjective experience
mhm,
of how these COVID dynamics play out. I haven't seen enough research on these loss dynamics. Like, we experienced a lot of loss during the pandemic. People have
yeah,
lost jobs, they've lost friends, they've lost lives that they thought they were going to have,
mhm,
and like I think we've only to even consider these dynamics.
yeah,
And you're right, it's not just your personal experience; it's also people around you. Are going to share that experience.
yeah. I think that's really
Yeah,
fascinating. Like that again, like especially congregation. I know. I think maybe in this article, like you had
mhm.
some of the quotes that
Yeah,
pastors or
yeah,
preacher what were saying. I know
yeah.
some of them are just like,
I like the one about the
what?
mask, like that.
Yeah, the face of
Yeah, the
God,
face
or
of God, like the mask covers up the face of God. It prevents you from singing in the choir,
mhm,
and it's like there is a surface level. You're preventing us from carrying out our religious exercise,
yeah,
and I just kind of understand the motive to some extent. That's really what I'm trying to do with this. Trying to understand the motivations, for people to how do they overcome the risk of death? Maybe that's just because
yeah,
I'm neurotic and I'm like, and like the risk of death like is like really important to me. And
yeah,
it's like and everything else is kind of not as important. But it's like so it's fascinating to me that some people are willing to make that trade-off for political reasons or religious reasons, and that blows my mind.
yeah.
And I have to study that.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
to me it's just
yeah,
again with
yeah,
such a
yeah,
population,
yeah,
especially
yeah,
this denomination that's
yeah,
so like hardcore into um, right?
yeah,
In a sense,
yeah,
kind of downplaying, but it's like, how do they deal with the death? Or right? It's perhaps they're just like, well, they died of pneumonia,
yeah,
but they caught that because they
yeah,
had COVID, right?
yeah,
It's
mm,
man, yeah. So yeah, going hand in hand with that and Christian nationalism, super like and very interesting topics. Um, so one last thing on religious states
mhm.
is, again, kind of looking at mobility and aging. And so I want to ask, why are there behavioral risks less pronounced among older populations in religious states?
Okay, so we found looking at state. This is now state level, right? We looked at states that were more religious and had a higher percentage of conservative Protestants. They were essentially moving around more during the pandemic, and that was indicated by their cell phone movement, right? So
Hmm.
they weren't sheltering in place; they were moving around a lot. But we thought that that pattern might depend on the age structure of the state. For example, if you live in an older state, a state with a higher percentage of people, that
Hmm.
maybe that might alter your behavior to some extent, because there's New Testament and Old Testament doctrine about respecting your elders and caring for your elders.
Mhm.
And so we thought that that type of rhetoric, might mean something to conservative Protestant populations that are also surrounded by elderly populations. And that's
Yeah.
essentially what we found, is that, you did find that conservative Protestant states, higher percentages of conservative Protestants were moving around more during the
Mhm.
pandemic, and
Mhm.
they were staying at home less. But that was less common in states that were also older or had more elderly people. And so there's this idea that when you're exposed more to elderly people who are especially vulnerable, we all know that the
Yes.
elderly were especially vulnerable to the pandemic, that they were maybe reining back some of their movement a little bit,
Mm.
because they were surrounded by elderly people. And so that just shows some of the complexities that that sometimes, the conservative Christianity isn't uh, isn't always a clear risk. Sometimes there are certain subpopulations where the
Mhm.
conservative Christianity is actually risky.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah,
because right, if your friends are
yeah,
not going out,
yeah,
then you're probably not going to be going out nearly as much. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, because from that article, "Love Thy Aged."
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
again,
yeah,
another stellar title, man. I'm loving them. And chat, I'll
yeah,
post all these articles
yeah.
once we finish the interview, so y'all and can go look up yourselves. They're worth the reads. And but yeah, just that like you said, there's subpopulation because by and large, and everyone listening, like, man, they're talking a lot about conservatives, and Protestants. Don't worry, we'll talk about liberals.
Mhm.
But right, that's like the one thing. It's like, oh, it seems like, well, more risk taking. But I that's what stood out to me and why I liked it. I wanted to
Mhm.
bring up this article. So well, there are subpopulations, right? It's not
Mhm.
a cut and dry,
Homogenous group,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, it's because and that seems this goes back to how
Yeah,
we like to politicize everything. We
yeah,
like it either yes, no,
yeah.
like it's all cut and dry, and I like it
And
that
we haven't
it's
even
not.
done a good job. In my opinion, we haven't even looked at the subgroup very,
Hmm.
like, different types of conservatives, different types of conservative Christians. We haven't even looked at like gender variations or anything like that. Like, there's got to be some subgroup variation.
Right,
Yeah,
everything,
yeah,
especially once you start looking at like race, ethnicity,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
down further
Yeah,
south,
and
like
race, yes,
yeah.
exactly, exactly. Because you think like a lot of this conservative process stuff is probably driven by the conservative Christians and
Mhm.
not Black Protestants.
Yeah, not which is
Yeah,
again, that's like a
yeah,
whole another
yep,
area to explore. So
yep,
I mean,
yep,
still lots of exciting stuff with
yep,
regards to how religion
yeah,
ties into it.
yeah, yeah.
All right.